the Egyptians could form a cabinet with a prime minister to run other affairs of the country. Following the revolution, following the First World War, Egypt did a lot in the war to help Britain and the Allies. There were, in the next, one of the speakers, Dr. Anderson, will talk about this part. A large number of Egyptian farmers were actually drafted in the army as workers, and many of them died during these trips in Palestine, Syria, Europe, etc. And Egypt supported the British with lots of food and everything during this war. So Egypt demanded independence at the end of the war. And on November 13, Saad Zaghloul with Abdelaziz Fahmy and Ali Sha'rawi met the British High Commissioner, and they asked for a permit to leave to London to meet with the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister to ask for cancelling this protectorate issue and the self-rule of Egypt. The request was rejected by the British government, and Zaghloul went to talk to the people, speaking in different meetings. They prevented many meetings, the British Army in Egypt, but he could talk to smaller groups. There were lots of press campaigns, distributed pamphlets, and he could collect 2 million signatures from the Egyptian that he is the one who is representing the Egyptian people. The population at that time was a little more than 13 million Egyptians. And this is Saad Zaghloul at that period. Britain refused to negotiate with Saad Zaghloul and claimed that he is not authorized in this. And on March 8, 1919, the British forces arrested Zaghloul, and he was exiled to Malta, a small island in the Mediterranean. And this news became known all over Egypt. So March 9, 1919, the Egyptian Revolution started. Actually, it started by students of the universities in Egypt, started by the law school, and other schools followed. Then the high schools joined, the people in the street also joined. The demonstration that day was peaceful. However, the British arrested 400 students on that day. You could see here one of the tramways of Cairo, where the demonstrators were jumping over the train. Next day, demonstrations became much more vigorous. Al-Azhar Islamic University joined demonstration. Major demonstrations all over. Public transportation stopped completely. Banks and shops that day. And as you see, one of the pictures of the violence which occurred on that day, the revolution continued. By the workers who joined, mainly railway workers, and then the lawyers had their strike, and for the first ever women's demonstration in Egypt was on the March 16. And these are the veiled women demonstrating, and again this is a big demonstration of all these women, veiled women, in 1919 on that day. This is Safiya Zaghloul, Saad Zaghloul's wife, who already took off her scarf, and she had the Egyptian flag at that time. In March 18, Cairo became completely isolated. Major demonstrations in Alexandria, total chaos in all governments, railways, telegrams, post services were completely disrupted, preventing communications between different parts of Egypt. Huge revolt by farmers all over Egypt, and this will be again talked on by Dr. Anderson. And these are the major demonstrations which occurred at that time, to the extent that small town in Lower Egypt, in Delta, announced an independent Republic, a small town, when a group of students started demonstration. They were supported by Yusuf al-Gendi, who was an activist, and the local police cooperated to form this independent state, which lasted for a number of days. It disrupted connection to the rest of Egypt. They collected even taxes and started to organize local things. This Yusuf al-Gendi, the leader of Zefta, later on, when he became a member of the parliament in the elections few years later, the revolt continued extensively all over Egypt. Police stations were burned, railway services were completely disrupted, major funerals with hundreds of thousands of participants, and the number of martyrs was quoted by the British to be between 800 and 1,000, and according to Al-Rafi, the Egyptian historian, it is 3,000, and they included Muslims, Copts, and the Jews. And this is a major demonstration, as you see here, the crescent and the cross in one of the demonstrations. And this is the American flag, Egyptian demonstrating wants the support of the United States in the fight with the British, and that happened also in front of the Italian and French embassies or consulates. There were no embassies at that time, it was only consulates. And the Copts played a very important role in the revolution. Copts from all strata of the society joined from day one. Priest Sergius was the star, giving speeches in mosques, churches, and everywhere. Demonstrations all carried cross and crescent, signifying unity. And this is Priest Sergius, who was a very well-known figure in the 1919 revolution. Copts, among the leadership of the Waft party, there were 7 Copts out of 15. Misa Wasif Boutros Ghali, Sinop Hanna, Naguib Iskandar, William Makram Abed, Fakhri Abdel Noor, and George Khayyat. And this is again one of the demonstrations clearly shown. The British asked Semika Basha, the founder of the Coptic Museum, to explain this phenomena, which they couldn't believe, and they didn't count on that this solidarity between Muslims and Copts. The answer was Zaghloul is secular in thought. He never discriminated against Copts, and he has pledged to abolish any differences between Muslims and Copts. Later on, the women met in St. Mark's Hospital in Cathedral in Cairo, and they invited Muslim women to boycott the mission of Milner, who was Minister of Colonies during his visit to Egypt, and they planned another large women's demonstration in January 1920, and again the Copts, including the Vice Pope and the major Coptic figures, both from the church and from the public, they met together in St. Mark's Cathedral to protest against appointment of Yusuf Pasha Wahba as Prime Minister. At that time, Egyptians said, we will not appoint him as a Prime Minister and we leave this post vacant. And when Yusuf Wahba accepted, the opposition mainly came from Copts. After this massive change in Egypt, Britain had to change Sir Wingate, who was the General Commissioner, by General Al-Lemmi, who arrived the 25th of March to find that Egypt is boiling and the situation is totally out of control. And this is General Al-Lemmi. In April 7, Britain decided to calm down the situation in Egypt, to free Saad Zaghloul from Malta and let him go to Paris to present the Egyptian case in front of the conference in Versailles conference in Paris. The Egyptian had major demonstrations in Cairo, very happy celebrating the release of the rule. Allenby ordered investigations for the cause of the revolution, and he provided positive response to reasonable demands of Egypt. But the Egyptian responded by new demonstrations: we want freedom. There were many trials following that, death penalty for many Egyptians, and long-term imprisonment for many people in different parts of Egypt. In Paris, Zaghloul and El-Wafd failed to meet people in the Congress. Wilson, the President of America, refused to meet Zaghloul, and he previously, in his famous 14 points, he announced that all occupied countries should have freedom and we support self-independence and rights, etc. But Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of England, convinced him not to support Egypt. So he did not support cancelling the protectorate, and he supported that the protectorate will continue. Saad Zaghloul and his group continued to stay in Paris, talking to journalists, to members of the parliament in France, in England, and they also wanted to go to Washington. During that time, the Minister of Colonies, Milner, came to Egypt, and Saad Zaghloul asked the Egyptians to boycott him in Egypt. So nobody wanted to see him, and he only met few officials, but the people absolutely refused to meet him. And then Lord Milner wrote a report to the British government that it is necessary to provide something satisfactory to the Egyptian people. It cannot work anymore. Agreement with the Egyptian Sultan and the ruling elite will not be enough. Egyptians insist on abolishing protectorate and get their independence. Egyptian nationalists are not against Britain, but we must reach an agreement with Egypt, which reserves the interests of Britain. Tribunal courts and the privileges for the foreigners, Egyptians did not accept, and they wanted to cancel. And he told the Egyptian government, the British government, that you will turn Egypt to another Ireland with a continuous fight if we do not reach an agreement with Egypt. At that time, the Saad Zaghloul and his group met with some of the senators who were in Paris with President Wilson, and they wanted them to support Egypt in the fight. So they advised him to appoint Joseph Folk, who was the governor of Missouri, elected governor of Missouri, and finished his term, worked as a lawyer in New York. So he became the Egyptian attorney to represent Egypt in the press in America, and also to defend the rights of Egypt in the Senate. And he did a great job. This is Joseph Folk. Muhammad Mahmoud Pasha, who's one of the group with Saad Zaghloul, traveled to Washington. It was very difficult. It took 3 or 4 months to have a visa, because Britain pressed the United States and France not let the Egyptians go to the United States. But finally they reached Washington, and the position of the Senate was really excellent. I mean, when you read all the debates, minutes of the debates of the Senate, was really fantastic. And they voted positively for Egypt, but unfortunately they needed 2/3 majority. They had a just simple majority, which is not enough to pass the law. And the same applied for agreeing to the Versailles Treaty. The Senate did not approve the Versailles Treaty also with the same percentage of votes. This is Muhammad Mahmoud Pasha. Then finally, for the first time, Britain realized that they have to talk to Saad Zaghloul. That was more than 2 years after the start of the revolution, so they asked Saad Zaghloul to come to London for negotiation. and they had a negotiation there. Britain presented a proposal. It was rejected by Zaghloul. The Egyptian made another proposal. It was rejected by Britain, and then Britain presented a third proposal with some compromises. Zaghloul in Paris had a meeting with the group to discuss it, and they came up with the idea that Egyptian people should decide what they want. So he sent some of the people from Paris to Egypt with this proposal. They went in Cairo in different governors. They discussed the issue of this, and the final conclusion that the Egyptian people accepted that proposals with some reservation. They want clearly that the term of the word protected to be cancelled, that complete independence of Egypt should be clearly mentioned in the agreement, that independence of Egyptian foreign policy, Egypt must have a new constitution and new elected parliament, and they accepted that Britain could protect the Suez Canal area, and they did not agree that Sudan will be an issue only for England. They said that Egypt must be also in there. Anyway, Al-Wafd arrived in London with this proposal of the Egyptian. There was no reply from the British government. They didn't like and they didn't answer. Zaghloul went back to Egypt. After 2 years in France, there was a historic reception in Egypt. This is Zaghloul in his car, and the police around him on horses. And a new cabinet of Adli Yakan was formed, went to England, negotiated a possible settlement, and it didn't work. So Zaghloul announced that we will fight for liberation. And they asked Zaghloul and all the leaders to retire to their villages, and they refused to do that, so all of them were arrested, and the Egyptians decided to boycott the British completely in all subjects, goods, banks, companies, people, everything. And the leaders met in Zaghloul's home on the 28th of December. And these are the massive demonstrations supporting Zaghloul at that time. And on December 29, the British decided to exile Zaghloul for the second time in Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean. And after the exile of Zaghloul, there were arrests of all activists, continuation of unrest in Egypt. Then assassinations started of all 4 prime ministers. There were a trial of assassination. None of them was died from, but some people were hurt, and then they started to assassinate British employees, and so it became a big mess in Egypt again. And finally, Britain had to give in, found out that it is impossible to continue this way, so they announced it without any negotiations that their unilateral declaration on the 28th of February 1922, abolishing of the protected state in Egypt, declaring Egypt as an independent country with some reservations. Britain is responsible to defend Egypt, Suez Canal and communication, and protect foreign citizens and foreign assets, and Egypt should not interfere in Sudan. The outcome of this very important declaration was Egypt appointed immediately a Minister of Foreign Affairs. Egypt inaugurated embassies and consulates all over the world. British sub-ministers, all the British sub-ministers which were controlling everything in the ministers, were replaced by Egyptians, and a committee of 30 members drafted a new constitution, and it included Muslims, Copts, and one Jew. This constitution was really liberal, secular, and supported freedom of religion, freedom of opinion, and freedom of press. Zaghloul was released on the 27th of March, returned to Egypt. Parliamentary elections was done, and Wafd won 90% of the seats of the parliament. And Zaghloul became the prime minister in January 28th, 1924. All political prisoners were released, and this is again celebrating that victory. 1919 revolution, and lots of achievements apart from this. They abolished the protectorate, they made independence, liberal constitution, and elected parliament. However, they are more than that. The base of Egyptian nationalism and detachment from the Ottoman and the Islamic slogans of the Ottoman Empire, which lasted for many years, each became a different country. And equality between Egyptians, irrespective of color, religion, or race, liberation of women. Women removed the veil following this, that period and demonstration, major change in education and cultural revolution, a new economic and ideas and development of industry. And finally, this is Saad Zaghloul in the train leaving Egypt to meet the Prime Minister of England outside 10 Downing Street. That's Ramsay MacDonald, was the first Labour Prime Minister in the history of England, meeting Zaghloul as two Prime Ministers to discuss the future Egyptian-British relations. Thank you, Zaghloul. Thank you, our grandparents who fought for the liberation of Egypt, and thank you very much. There was something called the الجمعية التشريعية. I don't know. Was organized by Khedive Tawfiq and started in end of 1913. 2/3 were elected and 1/3 was appointed. And actually, they have only few meetings, 3 or 4 meetings, and the First World War started, so the British cancelled continuation of this Jama'iyya Tashri'iyya. In this meeting, Saad Zaghloul was elected, and he became the vice speaker of this Jama'iyya Tashri'iyya. Ali Yakan was appointed one, and Khedive put Hussein Rushdie Basha as the speaker of the parliament.
That question here.
Thank you, Professor Al-Ghar, for this wonderful talk. Thank you for enlightening us about this history that a lot of us do not know. I studied in Egypt. I studied it's supposed to be one of the best colleges, but I don't know much about this history. So thank you very much for enlightening. Now, the thing that I want to ask you is about about Wahba Basha and the Copts that refused him to be the prime minister. Can you give us the reasons why the Copts would refuse something like that?
Because I think this episode of 4 years was the only episode in the modern history of Egypt where Copts and Muslims were really one unity. Few years before, there was the Coptic conference in Asyut with lots of demands for the Copts, and another meeting, Islamic meeting in Cairo, and again lots of demands for the Muslims, and the country was totally divided. I really don't know what happened, and what is the reason. Why is this unity suddenly, and it didn't last long. It lasted reasonably well during the Wafd regime, where the Wafd was very secular and it had a good number of percentage of members of Copts and ministers and members in the parliament. But after, from 1952, the situation completely it changed. I think they had a belief in Zaghloul, and the Copts also did not trust the British, because the British did not really help them in any way. And Zaghloul gave them a good example, and he fulfilled all what he said. It was not just talks.
Gamal Omar, I have 2 points about your presentation, because we're not talking about 1919 to just remember 1919. We talk about 1919 because we are in 2019. So I'm going to bring 1919 to now. The other thing is, when you start talking about modern Egypt, as always, we do, we start 1805, or start with the Napoleon invasion of Egypt, and we don't connect what's before and what's after. Like, the modern Egypt just came from nowhere. So I think Peter Gran is around here, and he's going to speak today about that. So how we connect between Egypt era, because we always deal with Egyptian history as it's come from the dark and disappear to the dark. The connection between what's before Napoleon and what's before Muhammad Ali, what's before 1952 and what's after, what's before 2013 and now. So the connectivity in the Egyptian history, this is the first one. The second one is, in the 100 years between 1914 and 2014, there's 100 years. The constitution govern Egypt is not what's written on the paper in the Constitution 1923, or what happened after 1952, or what happened in 2011, or even the one you participated in 2013. 80 years or 80% of the Egyptian history is ruled by the martial law. When you have a martial law, or Qanun al-Tawari now, it's the same, and the British was declared in 1914.
Yeah, can we read this?
Yes. So what's governing is not what's written on paper. What's governing is, when you have a martial law, it's the end of the day is going to be one officer decide. So whatever paper we're going to write is the end of the day what's on the ground. Thank you.
Well, concerning the first question, actually you cannot separate Muhammad Ali from Napoleon, because Napoleon came 1798 and Muhammad Ali came to power 1805. So it's only 7 years between the invasion of Egypt by the French army and that Muhammad Ali took completely power. They left in 801. So in 4 years, Muhammad Ali became the main country. So I think you cannot really differentiate very much, because Muhammad Ali came because Napoleon came. And Napoleon, when he came, he opened the eyes of Egyptians that there is a different world, different culture, there is a different science, and the Egypt was living in mythology, and there was this Ottoman many years, and what it followed, Mamluks, and all these things started to change by Muhammad Ali. So what is before? I believe, and I think most of the historians would agree, that modern Egypt will start with Napoleon and Muhammad Ali, or around that area. But what after? Actually, and that is in connection to your next question, the first constitution of 1923 was very well respected by the government and by the king. This constitution had problems. one problem is that the king has the right to dissolve the parliament any time. So whenever the Wafd was elected, then the king was not happy from the Wafd. That's why the Wafd only governed Egypt for 7 years, totally together from 1923 to 1952. But otherwise, the king could not interfere with the judges or with the law. Nobody could do that. And the Qanun al-Tawara, or the martial laws, only for limited periods, applied during this period. From 52 till Sadat, there was a new constitution, which was also nobody, even Gamal Abdel Nasser, anybody, they all followed the constitution. But the constitution was a total dictatorship constitution. They changed the constitution, so the total power was in the president's hand, and the people had no power. So it was no problem that they would follow the constitution, because they could do whatever they like with the present constitution. When Sadat made a new constitution, which is more liberal, gave more power to the people, then the constitution became a piece of paper, and nobody really they did whatever they like and ignored the constitution from Sadat and onwards.
All right, going to allow one more question.
Just a comment on the gentleman's. Why did the Copts reject the appointment of Yusuf Basha Wahd as a prime minister? It was, like you said, they wanted Saad Zaghloul, but I want to add something.
No. It was not Saad. Yusuf Wahba was not competing with Saad Zaghloul. Yusuf Wahba was a minister for several years with other ministers who were Muslims and Copts. And they were considered to be close to the British, and they accepted the idea that we should have compromise with Britain. Britain is a big power and we are a small, weak country, so we should accept something in between, not total independence and cancelling. And for this reason, the Egyptian people said we don't want to have a prime minister. We want to have freedom first. So the Sultan, for Ahmed Fuad at that time, and the British pressed several Egyptian leaders to take the post of prime minister, including 3 or 4 Muslims, and only Yusuf Wahba, and all of them had to resign. But when Yusuf Wahba accepted the post, it was not the Muslims who said no. As an action of solidarity, the Copts who led and raised the flag, we do not accept.
Yeah, but there's an addition to that. Is that there was an attempt on his life by a Copt, and Ariyan Yusuf Saad, and he threw a bomb on him, and it failed to kill him. And I understand he lost his reflexes when that happened.
Yes.
And Ariyan Yusuf Saad was exiled, and I mean, just wanted to add, that this. As a matter of fact, in Al-Azhar, they used to sing إحنا الشبان إخوات عريان. That's how strong was the bond between the Muslims and Christians.
Yeah, all the 4 ministers who accepted that post, there was an attempt for the assassination. All of them, not only Yusuf Wahba.
All right, very good. We'll have to stop here because we are a little bit late. But thank you very much.